everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How are you doing? I am here in the dining room surrounded by the animals. Naomi is out with a friend. And so it's just me on the mic. Halloween soon. Happy Halloween. Is that important to you? It's not to me. Seems like a lot of people are making a big deal. Very good episode today. This is Robin Holcomb. If you don't know who she is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Originally from Savannah, Georgia, musician Robin Holcomb grew up in the Bay Area and began playing piano when she was 6. In 1977, she moved with her partner, composer Wayne Horvitz, to New York City and was one of the foundational members of the New York downtown art scene. Since then, she has composed works for orchestras from Portland to Philly, has been awarded grants from the National Endowment for the Arts to the League of American Orchestras, and recorded albums for labels from Sodic to Nonesuch. Her latest album, One Way or Another Volume 1, was just released on Westerly's Records, and it's great. Highly recommended. I like this interview a lot, not just talking to Robin, she's lived an interesting life, but also this is one of those slow burn eps, and I'll explain why. First, on my end, this was recorded, I think, the day after I was exposed to COVID, and I was starting to feel sick, and I was like, well, maybe it's just allergies. And so I was living a little bit in denial, a little bit in hope, I suppose, because, the last 2.5 years, every other time I've had like a little bit of a tickle in my throat, a little bit of fatigue, it has been allergies. So even though I knew that I probably had COVID, I was really trying to stay positive. It was just all this cat dander everywhere in the apartment. So I started off talking to Robin, this is before we were recording, but I was saying like, hey, if I am kind of off, I think I might have COVID. I'm starting to feel a little bit down. And she was like, oh, we can reschedule if you want. She seemed very excited about the possibility of rescheduling, and you'll hear at the very end of the episode why she was excited about that. So a little bit of a journey we go on together and end in a really nice place. Like I said, Robin's lived an interesting life, and we talk a lot about that, a lot about existential and therapeutic kinds of things. So I hope you like this. And if you do, why not check out other episodes of Beginnings? If this is your first time listening to the show and you're like, hey, I like how these chats are going. Well, you know what? I've been doing this show for 12 years, almost 13 years. I've talked to hundreds of musicians and artists and comedians and writers and so on and so forth from all creative walks of life. But okay, let's say you are interested in avant-garde musicians because of Robin. Well, why not check out these other episodes I've done with people like Arno Lindsay, David Harrington of Kronos Quartet, Melvin Gibbs, Bobby Previtt, Terry Riley. All very good episodes, so check those out. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the show, and if you can, why not write a review maybe? Not to sound like one of my relatives from the Bronx, but hey, maybe you could write a review. It takes 30 seconds. It helps out the show a lot. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. How long is Twitter going to be around? Not Elon Musk owns it. Is anyone actually going to be... Look, I'm desperately trying to hold on to Twitter the way it was about 8 or 9 years ago. I'm just trying to write jokes, but that's quickly fading as something people are interested in on that site. But if you want to see some jokes, that's where I'm writing them. And of course, we've got some great episodes coming up. Bill Orcutt, that's next week. He was great. Kurt Wagner from Lamb Chop is coming up. Brilliant writer Jerry Stahl. That was a real cool one. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Robin. I'm really glad you could join me for a number of reasons. I love your music. I'm also like the New York downtown art scene of like the late 70s, early 80s is like this like weird existential magnet, I think, for me. And so as someone who participated, I'm excited to talk to you kind of about your experiences there. But want to start further back
Hmm.
because you were born in Georgia, right?
Right.
But you didn't grow up there. You grew up in the Bay Area, right?
I did. Yeah. We lived there for 2 years, I think. My father was in the Air Force playing the trombone and picking up garbage. Those were his jobs. And then we moved to the South Bay Area where he was from, and my mother is from too.
How did they get just from the Air Force? They got from the Bay Area to Georgia. It was just being in, was he?
Just where he was stationed. Yeah. So I think they were living on the base in a trailer when I was born. And then my sister was born 2 years later. And then we drove across the country.
Was he in Korea?
No, he never left Georgia.
Okay. Okay. So
There's
just
a lot of garbage to pick up and a lot of trombone to play. So
how did he get relegated to garbage duty? Was it just like, well, we don't have enough trombone playing for him to do, so
I never asked him that, but maybe they'd filled up the kitchen duty. Who knows? But I don't know what picking up garbage entailed, but that's what he calls it. So.
Did you have like a close relationship with your parents? I think you're younger than my parents, but like I think about their relationship with my grandparents, and it was very like typically 1950s in my mind. Of
How would you what do you mean by that? Because then I can answer you.
Very strict separation between child and parent, in that in the sense that like where like they were a little looser with me, and there's a little more kind of emotional resonance between us. But like I remember when I was a kid and I had friends whose parents were like very open with them and they would all talk about things, and I was like weirded out by that. I found it very strange.
Well, I'm maybe somewhere in the middle. My parents are both alive, and I talk to my mother more often than to my father, but we're on very friendly terms. She lives in north of Sacramento. There's a fire like 10 miles from her. So we've been talking about that, but everything's good so far. And he lives in Sonora, in the gold country. He moved up there at the end of 1999 because he was convinced by, I think, Ralph Bell that the world was going to end. Ralph Bell, the shock DJ out of Nevada or something. Anyway, he was ready for that, and then not much happened. So, but yeah, we were. I don't remember them talking a lot about intense personal stuff. They never yelled at each other that I can recall. They divorced when I was 13. Let's see what else. He started talking about more spiritual type things later when he got into Rosicrucianism. And we would have gone out to dinner or something. We'd sit in the driveway for hours and talk about this and that. And she's always kept most of it pretty close to the vest, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I've ever had anyone on the show mention Rosicrucianism. I've heard of it before, but I don't exactly know what it is.
Yeah, I am not entirely clear either. And I'm not sure how ancient its roots are, but it's, it has to do with ancient Egypt, but I don't know if it's totally a new practice that started in San Jose, California, where they have their museum or what. But he was pretty fascinated. He was pretty fascinated by Mormonism for a while too, and was thinking about joining that church. I think it had to do with a potential girlfriend, but that never happened.
It wasn't like a particularly searching kind of, because it seems like as he's become a I don't know how you would phrase it, but like a doomsday prepper or something like that.
Yeah.
That there is something he's searching for, something that maybe was missing that he's like,
yeah,
find.
Never attended church. I mean, my mother was a biology student at San Jose State College, and every Sunday her job was to go into the lab and feed the fruit flies and the cockroaches, and she would dump us off at the Unitarian preschool just for whatever. So I got a little exposure to that, and I don't know. Yeah, neither of them were particularly religious, but he started looking for something more spiritual, but I'm not sure he's found it. He has stopped talking about it. So,
I mean, did you grok? Did you grok any of that when you were younger? Like that there was something in him that he was like searching for? I'm asking because I've been very fascinated lately when talking to guests about like the little cues that we pick up on that are nonverbal from our parents, and
Right.
like how we react to that. I think about like my parents hated their jobs or seemed to hate their jobs or seemed to always complain about their jobs. And I'm very confident that that pushed me away from like wanting a regular kind of job with a regular kind of boss.
I didn't get that from him, a sense of searching, until later. My mother, after they separated, she had that, what is it, the Anchor Bible, which has the Bible interpreted by many different heads of different religions. But she also joined a cult for a while called the Christ Circle. I'm not sure what it had to do with Christ, but it was led by a very, what's the word? Not like Charles Manson, but very attractive, charismatic person. And she was with him for a couple of years and gave away all her worldly possessions. And then she escaped later. And then she married her first cousin a few days after Wayne and I married. And then he eventually died about 8 or 10 years ago. And she's been living on her own since then. I'm not sure that comes up so much anymore, the spiritual quest. But interesting you used the word grok, because when I graduated from high school, I was Robert Heinlein's live-in chef, and I guess he coined the word. I'm not sure. Grok from It's in Stranger in Strange Land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I was his chef.
Was it like, I'm not sure what the timeline is. Was he a famous sci-fi writer at that time?
He was. Yeah, he was. He had a worldwide reputation. He was known to a considerable extent for his books for young adults, but he also had a few big hits, Stranger in a Strange Land being one of them. And I think the Jefferson Airplane came over one day, not while I was there, but they referenced that song in one of their songs. And they referenced that book in one of their songs. I don't think he really cared for them, but anyway, this was 1971. So he was a pretty big deal at that time. An odd bird, but.
And you were his chef. How did you?
Well, I was his live-in cook. Yeah. How did I get? It was somehow through my mother. We lived in a community called Bonnie Doon, which is in the coastal mountains near Santa Cruz, about 15 miles from Santa Cruz. And he needed a cook and a housekeeper, and she recommended me. And it was just the summer after I graduated from high school. I was still 16, and I did it for a while, and then I was fired and then rehired. So I was fired for spending the night with my boyfriend in town. They didn't approve that, so they fired me, and then they rehired me, but I couldn't live on the property.
Wait. So it was basically like having another parent around. Like,
in a way,
you're not
yeah.
allowed to be with your.
Well, they had a guest house on their property. Their house was round. They had 2 couches. One was her height and one was his. I think they differed by 3/4 of an inch or something. And they had all these modern gizmos in it. But they had a subscription for Playboy for the house and also for the guest house. And they just had weird, I don't know, habits, senses of comfort, whatever. They had one of the early microwaves, and I'm sure I used it wrong and got zapped. But anyway, they had beautiful photographs of a space launch. I forget which one, in their dining room. And every time a craft would land, they'd take out their cannon and shoot it off in the yard. And it was a wild situation.
Wait, so hold on. Sorry. I got to go back for a second, because like they disapproved. Was it that they disapproved like morally that you were with your boyfriend, or was it that like you should be on like?
That's unclear. Maybe they thought I should have told them I wouldn't be back until the morning, which I was back in time for work, but I don't recall. But I just had enough, so I left. But they still wanted me to cook for them. Yeah. And
so you're like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
You're okay.
But then they hired me back temporarily. I went to UC Santa Cruz after that. And Robert's wife, Virginia, told me on my last day, and she said, Robin, you might want to keep this kind of hush-hush that you know us, because you'll become tremendously popular at school if people know that you know us. So keep it under your It's a whole big deal. Anyway.
And that would have been a bad thing somehow?
Yeah, I don't know. I do not know.
So do you think you were, again, this is reductive based on one anecdote, but do you think you were a headstrong person when you were younger, or period throughout your life?
That's a good question. Not particularly, but on occasion. And I'm not sure if I can dredge up some occasions. Yeah, I must have been. I think I was at times, but not all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was a very good student and all that, but I think there was other stuff going on at the same time.
What other stuff, if you don't mind me asking?
It looked easy for me, but I'm not sure it was all that easy for me. And to get high grades, and one student called me the little computer. I think I had a reputation for doing really well in school, but it didn't make me tremendously happy. Or my first piano teacher, I was the star student right away, and that didn't make me tremendously happy. It was just, always the star of the recital, and it got to be sort of boring after a while. But I get bored sometimes. But when we lived in Bonnie Doon, I would hitchhike to school and to college, and sometimes I'd ride my bike for like 25 miles to college. And that was a really not very smart time for young women to hitchhike alone. That was the time of various mass murders in that area and so forth, but I did it anyway. I guess that's a little headstrong. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There's like, what was it that like you still wanted to achieve, even if it didn't make you happy? Was it just you wanted to please your parents? Was it a societal thing? Like, I think I'm supposed to do this, so I will?
Probably that more than pleasing my parents, although that they were pleased, and they seemed to be more pleased by the grades than what I was learning. But, it seemed kind of superficial to me. But their pleasure in it. But I started playing music in school, in elementary school, and that was really fun for a few years. And I played piano, and then I took up the string bass in the orchestra. And at that time, this elementary school had a kind of gifted slant or something. So I was shipped across town to go there. But for the basses, you went up on the stage, and there was a real stage in an auditorium, and you went in the back. There was a room off the wing, and with a skeleton key, and there were 3 or 4 basses in there, and the room's it's like white with rosin everywhere in the air. And these basses weren't as small as they are now, so they were pretty big. I'd take a bass down and practice it, but that was my start with that sort of thing. But that was pretty great.
When did music lose its sheen for you then?
I'm not sure it did, but I was kind of disillusioned by some teachers I had, and I kept playing some, and then I really started up again later. Mm-hmm. I had a long period of playing guitar in my room and singing folk songs. I just stopped. I mean, my piano to practice on when I started playing piano was in the living room, so it was very public. And my mother had decided to paint it red, white, and black. She was into kind of a constructivist period there. She painted everything red, white, and black. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, we didn't play music together. I mean, my father was a professional musician. He played trombone and combos in the South Bay area. But it was never part of our family, really. We just took music lessons. It
was a job for him.
It was. He also taught oral interpretation at San Jose State. He was in theater and music. He had a big band for a while that rehearsed but never performed, but they rehearsed in our living room, which was pretty cool.
Was it separated like that, where really it was like, well, this is what I do for a job, and music is a vocation, maybe in like a very strict version of that term, as opposed to like a calling?
That's a good question. I think it was mostly a job, but he did write a musical once with a friend of his, and called Commotion at Coyote Corners. It was a Western.
That's great.
And but he was mostly a jobber. He didn't play in other people's bands that much. He had his own group called the Graduates, and played in lots of bars in San Jose and farther north. And he had a lot of different jobs, but he started a theater company at one point and directed shows. And my mother ran the Mimeo machine to print out the programs and took tickets and so forth. It was a little family affair briefly. So they were both pretty creative. She did lots of different kinds of art projects, and he did music, and but they didn't. Music as a vocation was different for him, and she never considered herself a professional artist, although she wanted to give that a shot for a while.
Did they have any specific expectations for you, or was it just like they wanted you to do well in school and that was the end of what they wanted for you?
Well, we moved from Salinas, California to San Jose. In Salinas, my father was the host of the Popeye show, and we moved to San Jose for some job in TV or radio or something. And I immediately skipped a grade, I think, because of the difference in the schools. But and then after 2 years, I was sent to this gifted program, and on from that. I think they thought I maybe had something going on academically. In terms of being particularly unusual or special or anything musically, I don't think they had that when I was a kid. I think they're both impressed with my work as a musician as an adult, but as a kid, I don't think that was really expected or whatever. They would do things like drive me to youth symphony and so forth, where I stood on a box to play the bass because I was pretty strict.
But like, I mean, for anything, so not even musically, like they didn't want, like, I grew up with they weren't very explicit about it, but I could tell they wanted a doctor or a lawyer. Like I'm a second generation Jew. So like my grandparents immigrated and were like working class. My parents went to college, and definitely they wanted me to raise the stakes.
I don't recall that. And there wasn't no talk about marry a rich guy either. They sort of didn't go there, I think. When I went to college, I was really on my own. That was when you could go to UCC for, I think it was $25 a quarter. It was cheap for even those days. And I didn't write an essay. I drew a picture, and not a very good one at that. And I got in, and, they didn't have that much to do with my college experience from then forward.
The Popeye show, is that a radio show or was that
it was a television show on the local TV station? He had a little monkey puppet. I forget, it was Mr. Something or other. I forget. And then he had kids that sat in these bleachers, and they'd show Popeye cartoons, and he'd talk between them. And I was a guest one time, and I sat on the top row of the bleachers, and I fell back behind it and was pinned back there for the duration of the show. Nobody noticed that I was stuck back there.
Oh, no.
Anyway.
So did any of this influence you at all? Because here's the other thing that I'm thinking of. This is just a parenthetical, but like you are a teenager at the time that culture's shifting. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to people who were kind of at formative points in their lives at this shift, I'm very fascinated with like what the existential changes are, because I think I was born in 1979. And so I don't think culture really shifted. I don't know when you want to call it. Like, was it 9/11? Was it the crash in 2008? But between those 7 years or so, right, things changed. And I was born in one era and formed in one era, and now I have to figure out how to live in this era. But you kind of like were forming at a time during that paradigm shift, and I'm wondering if it like affected you.
Well, even way before that too. I was born in 1954, so the whole psychedelia thing happened, and that was major for me. Just not for my family in particular, but and Vietnam happened, and lots of things. In some ways, that felt more significant to me than what happened in the period you're talking about, although it wasn't. And just looking back in terms of how it impacted my life, there's a considerable amount of me that kind of cruises along now, and it's pretty appalled at so many things that are happening. And I have my small community in activism, engagement kinds of things, but my husband wants to move to Switzerland. We were there for 3 months this year, and it's just, there's hardly anybody out on the street, and they all farm, and it's all organic. It's really pretty remarkable. But so existential. I mean, I became,
sorry, it's a little. It's
okay. I became when towards, after I graduated from high school or just before, I started reading a lot about existentialism, spiritualism of various sorts, and it was very inspiring. I spent a lot besides hitchhiking to school, I spent a lot of time alone in the woods there. So that was pretty formative, I think. And just wandering around and reading and thinking. So
was there a particular book or something that you think was influential to your development?
There was a book I remember, but I don't know if it would stand up now. It was called The Somethings of God by Nikos Kazantzakis. I forget what it was. I think it's basically a long story, a book, and then it says at the very end is the last sentence is something like, and none of this is true, or none of this holds, or something. It just threw it off the window. But I think Thomas Merton, I was starting to read a lot of poetry then, and to write poetry. Yeah, I don't know. How about you? Did you have big books that shifted?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was more like I trace my development more along the lines of like TV and comedy. I mean, I got into philosophy. I read some Sartre. In high school, I didn't understand a word of it.
Yeah.
When I revisited, I took a class in existentialism in college. I like realized I'm like, oh, I didn't understand a word of it. I think there were a lot of like beat poets I read, Ferlinghetti, I think, and Waiting for Godot. Beckett, I think, was very influential on like pushing me in a certain direction. Again, none of the stuff, I don't think I understood it that well in high school. This is the thing, I'm curious if you felt this too with your mom studying biology and like on the Drosophila routine, and your dad playing music professionally as a job, less so than as a like creative outlet. I was pushed in two separate directions when I was younger. I wanted to study physics. I originally went to college to study physics, got caught up in philosophy, and then realized at the end of grad school, or towards the end of grad school, that what I didn't want to do any of this. I wanted to write. I wanted to perform comedy and things like that.
So were you teaching in grad school?
Yeah. Yeah, I was a philosophy professor.
Right.
And I had this like duality. I talked about this in an earlier episode, but there was this duality that I could not traverse. And it took, eventually into like going to therapy, where I could traverse the kind of like scientific, logical side of myself and the artistic, creative side of myself. And I think not being able to traverse that caused a lot of angst. It caused a lot of like anger and frustration that again, until therapy, I couldn't really like figure out that that's what was going on. And I'm wondering if you ever had any kind of feelings like that, or like what was going on with you? Because it seems like there was like a, if not similar, let's say analogical kind of upbringing for you.
Well, as I said, I played music much of my youth, but it was either in school or in my bedroom, and I wasn't writing music or writing songs or anything. When I went to college, I started for one quarter at UC Santa Cruz and really hated it, and went to the junior college for a couple of years, and then dropped out and went to North Carolina and sharecropped tobacco for a while. Then I came back and finished college. I think at some point I got really, the music of the art ensemble and Cecil Taylor and all that really grabbed me. And I started listening to that a lot. But at the same time, I was living alone in a garage and decided to write some music every day. So it was often just, 10 bars of music, but I still, use that music to write bigger pieces or so I had that kind of discipline starting, and I was into this very free music at the same time, and it just sort of happened. I was also playing Sundanese gamelan music at the same time in college, but that was kind of fun. Nothing I would ever pursue beyond school. Although we did form a kind of American gamelan group with the teacher at UC Santa Cruz. He was in it for a while. We built all these instruments out of aluminum and wrote music for that. And so did he. And that was really a lot of fun. But I just sort of slipped into music, and soon thereafter met a lot of people that I am still close to today, not the least of which is my husband, Wayne, and this drummer, Mark Miller, who died recently, who was a great drummer. We all moved to New York kind of at the same time. So things just kind of built. It wasn't like a schism of any sort. It was just sort of entering my life in a way, kind of.
Was there an existential decision at some point, or was it truly, as you said, you like slipped into each of these stages?
Well, I can't say I thought about being a professional musician for quite a while. I decided at one point to try to write a song cycle about when I lived in North Carolina. And so I wrote some songs, and I was trying to teach them to a singer I know. And she said, "Robin, why don't you just sing these yourself?" And that hadn't occurred to me. Or I wrote some music for The Tempest in Santa Cruz when we went back for a while, so I could finish my last calculus class. And I wrote the music for Balinese gamelan and a cappella singers, and the melodies were really hard for them to sing, and they seemed natural to me. So that was another clue. And just sort of a bunch of different clues, but also with tremendous support. Like my husband, Wayne Horvitz, has been tremendously supportive of my music all along. Without that, it would have happened much more slowly, if at all, I think. He was hugely significant. And we both really admire each other's music. We have many collaborators in common, and those early years in New York was a really nice scene for us.
Do you remember? I say like a moment, but really it's more of a process where like there's just suddenly a realization. But do you remember like when you had the realization, like, oh, this is what I am, or this is what I do, or this is like a deep part of me?
Well, I remember it was maybe that time when we had moved back to Santa Cruz so I could take this class and work on this Tempest production. But I went to the Great American Music Hall, and the art ensemble was there. And I think there was a small balcony at the Great American Music Hall, and I was seated like right over Lester Bowie, and he took a solo that changed my life, basically. And I felt very in it, but also it was very inspiring. So that was probably it for me.
Do you know what it was about the solo that like where everything fell into place? Like I know that feeling, but like what was it for you?
Well, it all made sense to me. It all there was nothing chaotic about it. I mean, it was energetic, but it just spoke to me or something. It was I just thought, wow, if I could just keep doing this, that would be so great. So
it's like a calculus problem. Like when you finally like figure out like integrals or whatever, and you're like, oh, this is easy now. I know what to do.
I never got that far, Andy. I barely squeezed by, and it was the only science or math class available that summer. So anyway, it looked like it would be fun if I knew about it.
Derivatives are pretty fun.
It was definitely it wasn't the original spark of me improvising and writing music, but it was definitely an affirmative one.
Right.
Lasted a long time. And to get it from somebody I'd only heard on record and all this, it was pretty great.
Yeah. There's something about that moment of seeing it live or seeing like all the pieces fall together live or seeing someone's brain when they're like improvising live. And to see, obviously I'm being metaphorical a little bit, but to like kind of like look at it as it happens.
Is that the cat?
That was the cat's tail covering the camera. There's something about that moment where like it's a lot different from seeing it from listening to a recorded version.
Yeah, you're there when it Yeah,
That
what's happening. Yeah. And I like to perform that way. I like to play free, and I'm much more comfortable doing that than doing about anything else on stage. But
yeah.
do you improvise when you were doing comedy more? Do you ever?
Yes. I like improv much more than I like.
Uh-huh.
I like performing improv much more than I like doing anything else. I get bored with like once I know a joke works. Like I've performed where I've like written this stuff before, mostly with my wife, because she's a professional stand-up, and she's extremely good at it. But I get bored once I know the joke works. I'm like, okay, I know the mechanics. I know like how I'm supposed to act to make it work.
Right.
But like improv is surprising, and I like that feeling of being surprised in the moment.
Right. And when you do it with other people at the same time, there's many levels and degrees of what I consider to be kind of success in it. Like you sometimes will improvise with somebody who just will not stop imitating what you're doing or take that as a starting off or whatever. There's some people who will never stop playing and allow for solos. There's, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty funny. Once when I went to Mills College very briefly too, during that whole school period, and George Lewis, the composer and trombone player and writer, he came to Mills as a guest artist, and he brought his DX7, and he had started developing improvising personalities with electric keyboards, and they would do certain things as if they were a person. But he didn't bring his cool sounds. He only brought the sounds that came with the keyboard. And he did this lecture demonstration, and it really sounded lame, I have to say, because he didn't have the cool sounds, but it was a good idea. But anyway.
Yeah, there's also, I mean, this is getting, again, maybe too deep for what it is, but like I do think there is a kind of when I improvise or even like being in the entertainment industry, I don't know what's coming next, and I like that feeling. Like when I was in grad school, I had this vision once. It was my brain telling me don't do this, and I didn't have the vocabulary or the emotional intelligence to like be able to just discuss it normally. It had to be my brain yelling at me, but like a vision of me sliding down a slope into an open grave. And it was like I could just see the rest of my life in academia. Like I know what's coming. I know what I have to do next and next and next and next and next. And I really felt claustrophobic and hemmed in by that. And I think that's why I like improv more. I like working in an industry where I don't know what the next project is necessarily.
Right. Yeah. I had an experience different from that, but when I was sharecropping in North Carolina, I had a series of real pedestrian medical things happen, and I didn't really pay attention. I had ascending lymphangitis, which is blood poisoning from a scratch on my hand, and I had a spider bite, and I had maybe measles, or I don't know, just different things. And then I went for a health checkup in the closest town, and a friend was a medical student there from Boston, and he gave me a checkup on the house. Anyway, they thought I had leukemia at the time. My blood balance of red and white cells was super off, and I found out, this is a crazy story, but I found out about that because my boyfriend at the time and I were staying in this guy Jim's house in town because the roof had blown off of our tobacco barn where we were living up in the holler. And that's for real. But anyway, I found a letter he was writing to somebody back in Boston, and I was looking for a piece of paper, and it said, then there's this young woman here, and we think she might have leukemia. We don't know how to tell her. So I walked into town, and he was at a basketball game, and I yanked him out of there and said, what's this about? And he said, yeah, we think you should go to a specialist. And well, anyway, the situation resolved in a few months, and I think I can attribute it to having taken being prescribed some birth control pills that hadn't been really very well tested, and I had quit them a few months before. So anyway, when I read that letter, I had this vision, like my life just flashing by in, a rapid moving slideshow, including me being on a stage with a microphone, which is corny, but I'd never done that before, which I ended up doing. So. Not intentional, but
I don't think corny. I think definitely like your brain was shouting at you like, hey, I think this is what you want to do.
Not sure.
Yeah. And if this is what you want to do, then you got a limited time based on the information you had at that moment, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's interesting how, like, I think both of us grew up in I don't know. I'm sorry. I was about to say, I think both of us grew up in an era where, like, you didn't go to therapy, but that's not true. I think, like, you lived through, like, the 70s was like a very heavy, like, therapeutic time, at least from what I understand. So, but was that ever a thing that you thought was worthwhile?
I wasn't into it during that period of time, but from about 1993 on, I've seen a million different therapists, off and on for various things, and not a lot of. I didn't get a lot out of each one of them as people in a way, but somehow something I kept growing during that period of time, whether it had anything to do with the therapist or not. The first guy I saw was at the University of Washington. He was an older man, and somebody had recommended him, and he diagnosed me. And I gave him a CD to listen to, and I think it was my second None Such CD. And he said, I don't know, I must have a lot of wax in my ears or something. I just don't get it, or something like that. That was pretty strange. But yeah, it's been, I had kind of periods of pretty dark depression off and on as a kid and young adult, and didn't take it very seriously until later. So.
Well, if you didn't, what do you mean by you didn't take it seriously? You just kind of like pushed it away, or you like?
I just thought, wow, this is intense, and I have to, just leave me alone for a little bit, and whatever. Just everything seemed real dark, and then it would change.
Mm-hmm. Like you would take all of my friends who have that kind of depression, like it's like taking a sick day or so. You like when it
kind
gets
of
bad.
Yeah, this was mostly in North Carolina, or in some after that, but yeah, I mean. There were no therapists in Meadow Fork, North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you end up sharecropping, and especially across the country?
Well, I had a boyfriend at the time who I met right after high school. And he had friends who had gone there for some reason, a married couple, and they bought some land in this tobacco barn, which they made into a cabin. And the only way to make a living there is to grow tobacco or tomatoes. And it's known for this kind of the burley tobacco, which is the kind that wraps fine cigars. It's very beautiful, has all these eyes in it, and it involves a tremendous amount of hand labor. You do use a tractor or a mule, but everything else you do by hand. And so he was going to go house sit for them while they came back to California for the holidays. And I ended up joining him. And we decided to stay, and we met this farmer, and he needed some young labor, and his name was Woodrow Wilson Payne, and he was a bootlegger and a moonshiner and a farmer. And so we helped him with his tobacco crop, and then we became equal partners the next season, and we raised a ton of tobacco and a bunch of tomatoes. So that's how I ended up there. Real near the Tennessee border. So you'd have to, if you cared to drink alcohol, you had to drive to Tennessee to get it because it was a dry county, even though he sold it out of his refrigerator on his back porch. And his wife, who was the deacon of the church, looked the other way.
Wait, he was literally a bootlegger at this time. Sorry, I thought you meant like he was old enough that he was bootlegging during.
No, he was a bootlegger and a moonshiner at this time. There was another farmer who looks like the man in the American Gothic painting, like gaunt, tall and gaunt. He was still making moonshine. He had served time on the chain gang for making moonshine, but he still did it. And he and this guy Wilson tried growing marijuana one year in the middle of a tobacco patch, and it was almost ready to harvest. And they got scared and they cut it all down and threw it in the river. So anyway.
Okay.
Enterprising old men.
Like moonshine. Jugs with 3 X's on it. Moonshine.
Yeah. Their moonshine was intense. It was really strong.
This whole period, it seems like you were like searching for something. Is it that you are searching, or are you just kind of floating like, oh, this seems like something to do?
It was more the latter, I think. Yeah. I did write a song cycle about some of those people later, so that became a good thing. I didn't play much music when I was there, but I was already into music some. I rented a piano for the last few months that I was there, but there wasn't much local music. We went to a couple of bluegrass festivals, but they were quite far away. And there was one person who played the saw in our community, but that was about it.
It's interesting. I mean, because it seems almost like, I'm not saying you were doing this, but it feels like you're like collecting experience in some way. It feels like there's something very like 1960s. Again, the way it's been transmitted to me through people talking about it or through like documentaries or films at the time or something like that. I get this feeling that people were just kind of like, oh, this seems like something interesting. Sure.
Yeah, well, typically people go to Europe and bum around, but now they go to Europe and do a program or whatever it is after high school. But I just went to North Carolina and it just came up and I decided to do it. And and it ended up being, it seems methodical, but it wasn't really. It just is whatever came up. Yeah. And I was on my own, so I could do whatever.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to interrogate is, because I'm a very like cautious, risk averse person. Like if someone was like, oh yeah, let's go do that for a year. And I was like younger, obviously, I would be like, I'm not going to farm in North Carolina. I'll get a job at the supermarket or whatever. Right. That's what I was doing when I was that age.
Yeah.
What was it that like, it seems like you had some kind of adventurous spirit.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I never traveled much as a kid, if at all. I think we would go from the South Bay area to the beach at Santa Cruz once a year with my grandmother, and that was about it. And I don't know, it just seemed like a good thing to do, or fun, or it wasn't scary or anything. It just was. I guess by the time I left, I was leaving a kind of a weird situation in my family. So there was this. I used to work at a hotline in Santa Cruz where we placed people who didn't have a place to stay for the night and so forth. And we had sort of booked all our resources for that night. And a guy came in at the end and he was very odd. And he kind of begged me to let him stay at my house. And I said, well, I live with my family. And he just burst into tears and I gave in. Anyway, he ended up living with my family for quite a while. He ended up being a real drag. And so I was leaving that for one thing. And I don't know, it just seemed like the right thing to do. I wish, I don't know that many kids feel that they have the freedom to do that now, but I guess everything costs so much more,
Yeah. How was your family okay with, I mean, wait, they were divorced at this time, right?
Yeah.
So was it with your mom?
Yeah.
Like she was okay with this, I don't know, I'll call him a drifter, let's say.
Yeah, that's an
odd drifter.
She was okay and became more than okay and then less than okay. And then she finally got rid of him. But yeah, he was a drag, and I feel badly that I was I brought him there. But why didn't we just kick him out right away? I don't know. He was very manipulative.
Oh, I think I understand.
He would wear a hatchet hanging from his belt. He was always sort of threatening and.
Oh God.
Yeah, he was.
It's weird. Like Night of the Hunter or something like that.
Yeah, he was odd.
I could see why, that would be like a catalyst. You're like, I'll try anything.
Well, it wasn't conscious, I have to say, but I did work out that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't bother me, but he was not that good for my family.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think a lot of the stuff is conscious at that age. Again, unless you're like very emotionally aware, which I think is pre 2000, pre like 2010. I don't know where you want to draw the line where people start it started to be more of a cultural kind of thing. But I think growing up in the 20th century, you're not taught to be emotionally aware unless by chance, like your parents happen to be like, and your parents maybe are therapists or something like that.
Right. Unless you get involved deeply in therapy.
Yeah. So a lot of it is just kind of like gut level lizard brain stuff. Right. Like, I think I know that was it for me. I just like felt weird in certain situations and like pushed away from those situations without having any kind of conscious knowledge of like why they were weird.
But you weren't one of those people who's drawn to those over and over again or anything like that, it sounds like. I mean, there are people like that who something is formative and then they just want to repeat it even if it's bad. So, yeah.
No, yeah. It was just like any kind of like anything that like set off that kind of like sensor in my brain. I was just like, let's just like steer clear of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was your parents' divorce, was that a problem for you, or was it just kind of like, yeah, this should happen. I'm glad that they're figuring it out.
Well, as I said, they never raised their voices in the entire time I lived with them that I can recall. My father, I remember, yelled at the water heater once because he was having trouble fixing it. But he started spending more time in San Jose where he was teaching and less time with us. And then who knows what happened, but it seemed like the right thing to do. It wasn't a surprise. For me, it was my sister just fell apart though. And it probably affected me more than I thought at the time, but it was good for both of them. But it didn't seem like it was bad for both of them to be married either. But I didn't consider it a big loss not having both of them at home because I was moving towards getting out of there, I guess. Even at 13, I was probably starting to think about it.
Yeah. I only ask because I'm like curious about these kinds of like rifts or these kind of discontinuities in people's lives and how people weather them and how that sets them up later in life. That's why I ask things like that. It's not like a prurient kind of thing. It's more like, oh, okay. Well, that seems like for a lot of people, a particular kind of traumatic experience. Divorce.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I remember being like unemotional, like flat about it. So I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. I wasn't distraught. And that's, in retrospect, is kind of odd, I think. But my mother was also kind of emotionless. She said, go over to the house. Your father wants to talk to you. She didn't want anything to do with it. And so there's a lot of stoicism, I suppose, in my family. But
that's interesting. Like, do you think, again, this is so reductive, but like, do you think that music is a way for you to kind of, as an outlet for the emotions that like you are being stoic about in any way? Again, reductive. I'm fully aware of that question.
Well, I'm not sure how stoic I am, but they were. I'm sure there is stoicism in me, but I don't know, the whole notion that, I've come across many phenomenal classical musicians who, when you ask them to improvise, if I write a piece and I ask them to improvise a little bit, some of them will just totally freeze and they will have no idea what to do. And for me, it just seemed the most natural thing in the world. Of course, I'm not an amazing classical player, even though that's what I studied when I was a kid. It just... And when I get to improvise with people that I really click with, like there's a couple of musicians in Vancouver, BC, that it's just phenomenal whenever we play. And for both of us and for the audience and everything, it's just, we just know when somebody's going to go somewhere and we don't follow them, but we respond or create a context or play, interact with the other improviser. And it's just great. And so it's very much more vivid than some things in regular life. So I guess there's something to what you're saying, that it feels totally natural. And it's fun. For me, it's fun to listen to. Some people, it drives them crazy to listen to it. But,
we're right towards the end of the show, but I'm still kind of curious about New York.
Okay.
Because that was my parents are from New York. That's also part of the like draw of it. Yeah. And I thought I was I was there for a decade and I thought that's where I was going to live for the rest of my life because I loved it so much. Where are you now? Los Angeles.
Oh.
Just because that's where the work is. There's like, I don't know, 5,000 more jobs here than there are in New York, more than that. So my wife and I ended up here. But I'm kind of curious, like, what was it like? Like, Was it a big culture shock to end up there from the, mostly being in the Bay Area? What was it like to go there and be basically be like a founder of this very influential art scene?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a founder, but I was there towards the beginning, and I was a carrier of the torch for a while. Well, when a couple of our friends had moved there before us, and they found this building on East 7th Street between B and C, and there were actually two buildings that were connected. It was a co-op and run by a kind of a communist guy. And to buy into the co-op, you paid, I think, $250. And the rent was $50 a month, or the maintenance. And John Zorn still lives there. He has 3 apartments. Wayne and I each had one. Elliot Sharp, the composer, now has mine. It was really affordable then, but it was, Lower East Side at that time. There were basements filled with water. There was a lot of street activity, and there were people lying on the street. There was shit on the street. There was all kinds of, it was real different. Than it was scary to walk around at night for a while. But it wasn't that big of a deal in some ways. I had driven across the country in a VW Bug, which I ended up giving to one of the kingpins on the street, Frankie. And so he always kind of looked out for me. So that was good. But I think the building that Wayne and I lived in, I think Jack Kerouac had lived there at some point. There's a famous photograph of him in a fire escape. I think it looks a lot like our building. And I think people have said that he lives there. But anyway, that's cool. But it was very much like a little village. Not for the old sense, like the Eastern European families there or whatever, but a lot of musicians lived there because it was inexpensive. And we started a performance space on Bleecker Street in the West Village. 5 of us who had moved from Santa Cruz together, and we called it Studio Henry. And that was kind of the precursor to the Knitting Factory and other clubs that opened later. But you would walk down some stairs, and I think it was a dirt floor, and we built a little stage, and a lot of people did their early shows there, like Zorn and other composers who've gone on to be, pretty major improvising or new music composers. It was below a pet store, so creatures would escape, and there was a little gerbil who'd sometimes sit on my shoulder while I played, or there were lots of crickets, just like Buddy Holly. But we made some records where you'd hear the crickets in the background, and there'd be snakes every once in a while. And we had a big benefit to raise money to put in a bathroom. It used to be a speakeasy many years ago, so that was cool. But anyway, so it was kind of the end of the loft scene when we moved there, and the beginning of something else. But it was really fun. I just had textbook editing jobs, freelance, or I cooked in restaurants to pay for my life and played music as much as possible. It was great.
Did it feel special at the time, or is it in retrospect that you're like, oh, that was
I think it was so different from anything I'd seen anywhere else. I mean, I'd never lived in Amsterdam, for example, or it seemed pretty special at the time, but it was really special in retrospect, particularly the rent. Not entirely. No. It was, there were little venues all over, and that was great. And and I ended up collaborating with people I wouldn't have otherwise. It just sort of fell into place. So.
Yeah, that's one of my little theories with absolutely no evidence. But for a fertile artistic scene is proximity, like almost like a pressure cooker. You got everyone together kind of doing, making art all the time. And that kind of what makes a scene or makes a fertile scene. And then, where you start having ideas that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Yeah.
And you don't have to apply for a grant to execute the idea or whatever. You just tried it out. My first big band that I formed was called AKA Orchestra Music. It was like orchestra music, but I hadn't, so people would come and play through these charts, and I started getting ideas for what ended up becoming all sorts of other projects, including writing for the Philadelphia Orchestra last year. So just sort of all one thing leads to another. But the whole way the music industry has changed, and how do you make money as a musician anymore? It's crazy. And I have a new recording coming out on the 14th of October, and it's going to be all streamed. And we're going to make some CDs to go along with it, but we're basically producing it ourselves. And I've never done that before.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. To say the least. Wow.
Robin, thank you for joining me.
Oh, this is a pleasure. I have to tell you, I was a little bit dreading this, but yeah, it just flew by. And you interviewed my friend Carl Blau recently. I look forward to hearing, I heard part of that, but I look forward to hearing more of it.
Yeah. He was great. Do you mind if I ask, what was it that you were dreading? Just like the topic, or?
Oh, well, first of all, I thought it would be like the old days where you talk to somebody and then you play some music from your new record and you talk about that. And so there'd be music in it, but also the idea that it's about how your childhood, which I don't remember a tremendous amount about, and also your challenges or your, existential challenges or your mental health challenges or whatever. I thought, I don't know how much about that I want to reveal. And then, and then I thought, well, if the show's an hour long, we'll probably have to talk for 2. And anyway, but
nope.
No, I did. It was a total pleasure.
I respect everyone's time.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure to speak with you. Okay.
Bye. Just a delight. Thank you. All right. Have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.